Have you wrestled with imposter syndrome? Excessive and unsubstantiated self doubt coupled with an uncanny lack of confidence? I'm your host, Betty Danowitz. Listen as I interview highly successful individuals about their experience with this imposter syndrome and how it manifests itself in their lives in this If You Ask Betty podcast series dealing with imposter syndrome. Hi, Casey. Thanks for being on the podcast.
Hi, Betty. Thanks for having me.
Casey, tell us about you.
Sure thing. Well, my name's Casey Platt. Like you mentioned, I'm a senior instructional designer at Ally Financial. I've been at that company for about 3.5 years in L&D the whole time, working with you for a short stint, which was wonderful. Before that, I worked in higher education. So I worked about 3-4 years in higher ed as a career advisor. And a lot of my time was spent with graduate students and alumni, talking to them about what they want to do with their degrees, where they want to go. A lot of conversations about resumes and cover letters and interviewing and LinkedIn and all that fun stuff. And so I had a really great insight into imposter syndrome during that time. But I've experienced it myself, which is why we're talking. Outside of work, I really enjoy spending time with my family. I've got a daughter, 1.5, and a son on the way very soon. And my wife and I love to explore the outdoors, go to live music, all the fun things together. So I'd love to spend time with them. Also spend some time volunteering in my community, which I really enjoy, and it means a lot to me. And that's a big part of who I am.
Yeah. And you live in the Chicago
I live in the
area.
suburbs of Chicago. Yes.
Chicago. No. Chicago.
Chicago.
Chicago. Out the side of the mouth. Chicago.
There you go.
Gotcha. Yeah. So when you think about it, what are some of your biggest accomplishments in life and in work? You mentioned a few, but specifically, what are your biggest accomplishments?
Well, my biggest accomplishments, I'll start with family. Definitely very proud of myself for the family that my wife and I have built together. Happy that we've got our little daughter, she's a cutie, and then our son on the way. So continuing to build our family, but really proud of that as an accomplishment personally for myself. Another thing would be my master's degree. That took me a long time and a lot of money and a lot of effort to accomplish that goal. So I graduated from Michigan State University in 2020, and I got my master's degree of education, and very proud of that. That's a big accomplishment. Something that happened to me last year was in 2023, I was honored from Jewish United Fund Chicago for their honoring of the 36 Under 36 Award for outstanding contributions to the community. And
Very
part
cool.
of that, yeah, thank you. Part of that was my involvement with the Illinois Holocaust Museum. So I sit on a board at the museum called the Young Professional Board. We do a lot of education work and fundraising and different things working together to engage our community and get the word out about the museum's events and exhibitions. So I really am proud of the work that I do for that and have been recognized. So I'll call it an accomplishment.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then
I love
in
it.
my career, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I love that it's 36 under 36, not 30 under 30, because I always feel like, oh gosh, that's really far away. But 36 under 36 isn't that far away for me. So, I mean, it's still, I don't qualify, but you know what I'm saying? Like, it's nice they give you that little extra 6 years to make a difference. I like that.
Yeah, yeah, it includes a little bit more of the young people. I use air quotes on that one because,
Right,
yeah, we're
right.
still young, right? Right?
Absolutely. All right, work. You were going to talk about work.
Yeah. So in my career, I've had some accomplishments, and I really just think of where I'm at in my career right now. I'm proud of that. I see that as an accomplishment because switching from higher education to the corporate world at Ally Financial was challenging. It took me a while to connect with the right team, the right people. So I see that as a big accomplishment. And even since I joined Ally, I've grown in my career. So I definitely see that as an accomplishment. And also just the impact that I'm having on the people that I work with and the learners that are experiencing what I'm creating. I do see that as an accomplishment that I'm proud of in my career.
Agreed. And you have come quite quickly through the ranks as my mother would put it, at Ally. So because when we met, I interviewed you. You came on as a learning specialist in insurance operations, right? Is that right?
Hmm. Yep,
I've
that was my
I've
first
slept
role at
I've
Ally.
slept quite a bit since then. So like remembering that's like a miracle for me. And how many jobs have you had now in the last 3.5 years there?
I transitioned into my current role almost exactly 2 years ago.
Okay.
So I switched from the insurance operations team as a learning and development specialist over to our enterprise HR learning and development team as a senior instructional designer.
Yeah.
It was a big jump for me. And if I'm being honest, I was surprised that I was offered the job and invited to take on the job, but I definitely felt prepared. I just knew there was a lot of talent out there, a lot of competition at the company. So I was flattered and surprised and excited to take on the job 2 years ago.
I remember telling Colleen, and I don't work there anymore, so I think I'm allowed to say this. I remember when I did one of your interviews, I was like, you need to hire Casey. And she was like, you sure? What about this guy? What about this? What about this? And I was like, not that she didn't want to hire you. Please don't. That's not what I'm saying.
Hmm.
She just was trying to make sure I said, I looked at all of them. I talked to all of them. This one's great. This one's okay. You should hire Casey. Because I could feel that there was so much untapped potential. Anyways, I'm not supposed to be doing that. This is supposed to be your story, but I just want to make sure that that you hear that from me, that I was like, So you going from learning development specialist to senior ID is not a surprise to me. I can see why you would feel that way, but you were doing a lot of ID work before you even came on at Ally. It just wasn't called that. A lot of
Hmm.
the work you were doing with folks in their degree and career advising and things like that. So, um, what
Well, I
would
appreciate that.
what would other people say about you? I guess that was a nice little segue. I didn't even wasn't even planning on that, but so I asked you to tell me about you, what your biggest accomplishments were in life and in work. But what if I asked other people that? What would they say about you?
Well, it depends who you ask. I hope they would have positive things to say. But it's a good question, and it makes me think of what we were just talking about. And I said, in my current role, I was surprised that
Mm,
they would, quote unquote, take a chance with me and hire me. But actually, what I learned after I joined your team at Ally is from our manager Colleen. She mentioned concerns about me being overqualified for the position, which was not on my mind. That term did not come to mind while I was applying for jobs. Is that I'm
mm.
concerned that I'm overqualified? Never did I think or say that. And so that's just to demonstrate the difference between what I think about myself and what others would have to say. I don't know if overqualified is a word that anyone would use to describe me right now. Um, but I know that one thing that I hope that a lot of people would describe me as is reliable.
Mm.
I show up on time to meetings. If you give me a deadline, I'm going to meet it or exceed it. I like my work and I'm proud of my work, and I like to meet and exceed expectations. So I hope that people would say that I'm reliable and that they can count on me. I also hope that people would describe me as somebody who's a great thought partner, somebody who is a collaborator, that they see me as somebody they could come to if they need to bounce ideas off of me or maybe get some feedback on something they're working on. I pride myself in my ability to ask the right questions and communicate with people to get them to the answers that they're looking for. I hope they would say that I'm a great dad and that I take pride in my personal life too, and that I'm comfortable sharing the things that make me who I am outside of work. Because when I show up to work, I'm not just a worker, I'm a person,
Mm.
and I like to bring my whole identity to work without any fear or concern about saying the wrong things or ruffling any feathers with who I am.
And that is something you should be proud of, just so you know.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to stop saying nice things about you. That's it.
You don't
Period.
have
On.
to.
You're like, no, really. You're
No,
like,
please.
please, whatever you need to do. Okay, what has been your experience with imposter syndrome?
My experience with imposter syndrome goes pretty far back. Um, I'll say that in present day, imposter syndrome doesn't affect me as much anymore as it used to.
Mm.
Imposter syndrome used to be something that was lurking around every corner at work, every meeting. There was bound to be something triggering my imposter syndrome. There was bound to be something that would remind me of that voice that's telling me that I'm not worthy of recognition or praise. And that's really been my experience with imposter syndrome. My experience has been that I have this voice, and this voice occasionally tells me that I am not worthy of recognition, that I
Mm.
am not worthy of praise, that I'm not as skilled as I think I am, I'm not as knowledgeable as I think I am. Um, it pushes me to make myself small, if that makes sense.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
My experience with imposter syndrome has been rough because with positive and negative feedback, both of those things have pushed me to experience an episode of imposter syndrome, because positive feedback is wonderful and I love it, but it makes me feel like I'm succeeding sometimes in my ability to to camouflage,
Oh,
right?
you're
To sneak
just
past them.
fooling
Ooh, I'm
everybody.
right, right.
Mm.
So recognition, even last year's award that I was excited and surprised to receive, I was thinking, there's 36 spots. There's nobody else they could have picked for this. Um, and so the positive recognition, the positive feedback triggers me. But of course, the constructive, the negative affects me as well, because it's that fear, it's that panic that I'm being discovered as the imposter that I am. Um, and I mentioned to you that imposter syndrome doesn't affect me as much anymore. And
Mm-hmm.
that's big thanks to therapy on that one. But also, I see it as a mindset shift of understanding that that voice, and you do a wonderful job of explaining how it's separate from who you are. It's not
Mm-hmm.
your voice,
Mm-mm.
but that's the thought work that I've done, and the mindset shift that I've done is that um, I feel a little bit more confident in being confident, and a little less fearful of being arrogant or appearing arrogant. And that's really been my experience with imposter syndrome. There's a lot of examples I could share, but generally that's been how I feel
Yeah.
about imposter syndrome.
So when you're having an episode of imposter syndrome, how does it manifest itself? So for some people, it's perfectionism or overachieving or self-sabotage. What do you experience? What happens? What do you feel? What are your behaviors? Those types of things.
Well, I have felt it recently.
Hmm.
Um, And I'll tell you, it doesn't affect me as much anymore as what I said, but I am interviewing for a job, and I've got a big project that I've got on my plate. So these two things combined with the high emotions of a baby coming have been triggering a little bit of imposter syndrome. And the feeling that I get is panic.
Hmm.
It feels like emotional shortness of breath, maybe not actual physical shortness of breath, if that's a good description.
Mm-hmm.
Almost like I'm drowning. General symptoms of panic, I suppose you could say.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you mentioned perfectionism, and that is definitely something that I suffer with or without an episode of imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
And I think on that note of perfectionism, what happens to me is that I get into this constant seeking of validation when I'm feeling imposter syndrome. So if I'm
Mm-hmm.
working on a design, I'll share it with my manager and say, "Hey, what are your thoughts on this? Does this look right?" Maybe every sentence out of my mouth ends with, "Do you know what I mean?" Or "Does that make sense?" So those are the kinds of things that I would say and do when I'm feeling imposter syndrome, because I want it to be perfect. But I
Mm-hmm.
also, from my perspective, I want it to satisfy my audience. I want it to satisfy my leadership. I want it to satisfy anybody who touches it or sees it. I want them to be satisfied with it. And the imposter syndrome part of me is thinking, you know, I can't do this alone. There's no way that I could produce perfect, and I air quotes, perfect work um, without the assistance or validation of somebody more intelligent or more
Hmm.
professional or more experienced.
Yeah. Do you ever find that those feelings, those behaviors of having to be perfect and maybe overachieve to get there, needing that validation, do you ever find that that goes from I can't do this to I'm not like I can't do enough to I'm not enough? Do you ever find it turning inward so that it's no longer about what you can or cannot do or the level at which you can do it, but it's about you?
Absolutely. That is definitely something that I've experienced and that I've felt. And again, it's not as much that way for me anymore, just because of therapy and how I've been able to separate the imposter
Mm-hmm.
syndrome voice from my own voice so that I
Sure.
don't think that this is something I actually believe. But the thought that comes to mind is why bother? Why am I
Mm.
even trying? And that's where it kind of gets to be a little bit more personal than that. It's I'm not worthy of this project. They should find somebody who's more experienced, more professional, um, and more talented, really.
Okay. So I did. So even though you're saying to me that you don't turn it inward, the words that you just said, they should find somebody who's more, what did you say?
More talented, more
Talented, more
experienced, more professional.
experienced, more professional. So when you say find somebody who's more, you're saying to yourself is that I'm actually less,
Hmm.
less than what you want. And so I'm not great job therapist, great job Casey doing the work. But I want to make sure that people that are listening hear this. Even when you've done the work to separate that voice and to recognize it, you're using your coping mechanisms that to tame that imposter monster. Those thoughts are still there. It's just a matter of do I receive that I'm less, or do I just receive the thought that that's more, but I can stop the thought of I'm less, right? So it's like
Hmm.
that's progress. That's progress. So good job. I said I wasn't going to say any more nice things, but nevertheless,
Thank you.
yeah. So thank you for sharing that. And I appreciate the description of what you feel and what happens, because especially the panic part, because I find myself feeling that it's like a sudden wave of anxiety that sits on your chest like an elephant, and you almost feel short-winded, short of breath, like you said, but you're not, and you feel like I find myself doing this. I don't know if
Hmm.
that's something you do. And my husband would be
Yeah.
like, "What was that about?" I was like, "I'm just breathing." But really, I was breathing just fine. I don't know. I took a deep breath because I felt like that elephant was really heavy on my chest. So,
Yeah.
yeah, so when you think about the way that this manifests itself, so that little bit of perfectionism, that type of thing, are there other contributing factors to this? So we've talked about in previous episodes some of the common triggers, things like you know, like you mentioned earlier, feedback, positive or negative, having new set of accountability or requirements, being isolated. I mean, thank you, COVID. You gave all of us imposter syndrome, whether if we had it or not. Like being isolated from others, feeling different. Those are all common triggers. But here's what I want to know: is there something else about you that may make this imposter syndrome phenomenon happen, or make it worse, or that it affects it somehow?
Hmm. Well, a lot of what you described are triggers for me of definitely thank you, COVID. I agree with that.
Mhm.
I think that one thing that comes to mind for me specifically, and maybe others can relate, is that I feel more prone to imposter syndrome episodes and feelings of imposter syndrome when I don't feel seen, when I don't
Mm.
feel heard or understood. Uh, it feeds that self doubt, and I think part of the reason is because I feel like I'm not being clear. in the
Mm.
way that I'm communicating. And maybe my audience, whoever I'm speaking to, doesn't understand my point of view or doesn't agree with my point of view. And it makes me feel like a college professor who's never studied the topic before in a large auditorium of learners. And I get up there and makes me feel like I'm on the spot and I'm trying to share my expertise, but I really don't know. I don't know a thing about this topic. And my audience is confused. They're looking through their textbooks thinking, what page are we on? I don't understand this guy. Um, and I think that's a major challenge for me.
Mm-hmm.
Is I mentioned when I'm having an episode of imposter syndrome, I'm ending every sentence with, do you know what I mean? And does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And the fear is that they don't know what I mean and that it doesn't make sense and that I'm just talking in circles and my audience is waiting for me to shut up. They're
Yeah.
waiting for me to
They're
be
waiting
done
for you.
talking and so they can move on and get the actual work done so that the
Yeah.
kids can go play and the adults could go work.
Has anyone ever said to you, "Are you done talking? Because I've got other things to do."
No one has ever said
No.
it. And
Okay.
I think it's because I work with very respectful and kind people,
Mm,
but it's also because, right, like you said, that's my insecurity. That's my
yeah.
concern. That's my fear.
Hmm.
It's not reality in most or all cases.
When you say that you don't feel seen, um, talk more about that. Why do you think that you don't feel seen? Why do you feel invisible or overlooked?
Well, part of that is certainly because of our day-to-day work, and everyone's busy. Everyone's got a
Mm,
lot on their plates. I have a lot on my plate, so I understand the feeling. Um, Part of it is what I mentioned about bringing my whole self to work and my whole identity and who I am is very
hmm.
important to me. Um, but I recognize that some people might see my identity as controversial or political, and really it's my Jewish identity. It's really an important part of my life outside of work.
Hmm.
And no, I don't come to work and preach and talk religion all day, but I value differences and I acknowledge differences and I ask questions and have discussions about differences. It's a big part of our company's values
Hmm.
is our employee resource groups and the way that we engage with each other. Um, but sometimes, especially nowadays, I don't feel seen in terms of who I am and what's important to me about my identity. And it's a challenge for me. And I do think it contributes to feelings of imposter
Sure.
syndrome, of feelings of not not bringing my whole self to work because that might be a little bit too much for people. Um, it's a challenge.
Can we talk a little bit more about that? Is that okay?
I'd be happy
I
to.
have more
Yes.
questions if it's okay with you. Okay, so um, I always love that about Ally, by the way. Their employee resource groups were
Hmm.
fabulous and really well thought out, and people actually wanted to be a part of it. I really like that. So you were raised Jewish. You're an active practicing Jew. Tell me if I'm saying things wrong. Okay. Okay.
Hmm.
Because I'm really just doing what Hollywood's told me. I don't know much about your upbringing, your religion. I apologize. I know
Hmm.
enough. I know enough to know. I know it like internally, but I don't talk about it. So if I say the wrong word, please, by all means, be like, Betty, what are you doing? You don't know what you're talking about. Okay. Um, right now is kind of a rough time to be. I mean, arguably all of time has been rough to be Jewish, arguably.
Hmm.
But right now, there's a big spotlight. And do you feel like that is part of the feeling unseen? But what's going on right now in the world?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that hate and violence are unacceptable in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
There's just no room for any brand of hate or violence
Nope.
anywhere, anytime. But I'm feeling more and more every day that hate and violence for me and my family and my community are somehow acceptable or not as bad as other forms of hate and violence. And it's particularly frustrating because I make it a point to make sure that other marginalized communities are seen and heard. And,
Mm-hmm.
I'm involved in all of our employee resource groups, actively involved. And I listen and I make an effort to understand
Mm-hmm.
and hear where people are coming from. And I won't speak to how my company is communicating or not communicating, because that's not what's important. What's
Mm-hmm.
important is how I feel and how it contributes to imposter syndrome, which is what we're talking about.
Yeah, exactly.
And
Yeah.
it's really just that fear and that pulling back and that making myself
Mm-hmm.
small,
Mm-hmm.
and that's part of how I feel with imposter syndrome. And it is something that is contributing to those feelings recently for me, of feeling like there are some things about myself that I shouldn't or can't talk about or bring to the table. And that is me making myself small in a
Yeah.
lot of cases. And this
Yeah.
is in my professional life and my personal life.
Sure. Can I ask you, are you an only? Do you have siblings?
I have a brother.
You have a brother, and
Hmm.
he's an older brother. You're the youngest.
Yeah, he's
Okay.
1 year older, and I'm
He's one. Oh,
youngest of
so
the
you guys are
family.
super close.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, super close. Do you think that you're, and this is just wildly left field because I did not prepare you with this question, but do you think that
Hmm.
your birth order has anything to do with the intensity or the occurrence of imposter syndrome?
Well, I haven't thought about it, and I look up to my brother, and I idolize him, and he's the greatest. But I never really thought about how that might contribute to my feelings of imposter syndrome, because my brother, not since we were very young did he make me feel small,
Mm,
because he was
hmm.
always 1 year older. Each year I would get older, and then he would get
Yeah,
older. It would always
super
he
close,
always
super close. Yeah,
yeah, and we would roughhouse, and he was always bigger and stronger. Even just that 1 year on me had in my
yeah.
childhood. So those feelings of being smaller and less experienced and less wise than my older brother. But I never really thought about how that might contribute to my imposter syndrome.
And that's okay. That answer is totally fair. I don't
Hmm.
know. No is a perfectly okay answer. I'm an only, so I'm always interested in people that have siblings because I have absolutely no frame of reference other than the fact that I have now two daughters that are sisters, and I don't
Hmm.
think they're normal. Like they're normal, but I don't think their relationship is necessarily normal because the thing that sisters and brothers do where they like haul off and smack each other and get each other in trouble, and like I didn't understand that, so I didn't really allow it as a parent. Like it would happen and I would
Hmm.
be like, you need to be nice. You need to be nice to your sister. And people that were with me, like my friends would be like, hey, that's what siblings do. And I'm like, whatever you say, I have no idea. Like all I know is that wasn't very nice. She just literally walked up out of nowhere and just smacked her right upside the head to see what would happen. Like, is that is that what they do? Is that what siblings do?
Oh yeah.
Just yeah, that's weird. I don't understand it. So and I'm open about that. That's authentically who I am. So
Hmm.
that's why I say I don't know that they're necessarily normal because I've tried to raise them in a different way instead of allowing that to happen, trying to talk through it. And so I think they probably do it less is my point. Anyways, I've gotten way off track.
Hmm.
But I do often wonder how birth order affects this and how the things that have happened or the things that the values we were taught growing up affect imposter syndrome. I find that equally, though, people who were brought up in a religious background and people who were not still have the similar feelings that I'm not enough or it's not enough or the worthiness factor. And for a long time, I thought the worthiness factor came from a religious background. I mean, I grew up in a religious background, not Jewish, but like and my mother wasn't, but the schools I went to were, so there was like this authoritarian thing that you know what I'm talking about.
Hmm.
And see, I just did that. I just said, did you know what I'm anyways, that's just
Oh
because I
yeah.
didn't have it really for me, it was more because I didn't have any more words to say. But the idea was like I know that that's where some of my imposter syndrome comes from is there were these strict rules and that equaled worthy or not worthy. But I
Hmm.
find that the same thing of people who were not raised in any type of religious background or not raised with brothers or sisters or had six brothers and sisters, they're all still saying the same words. So I think it can affect us. I think it can make things more intense or less intense, but we all still seem to have imposter syndrome. We all still seem to be having the same feelings as the other person, regardless of background and upbringing. What do you think about that? Just curious, because you're a great thought partner.
Oh,
See what I
thank
did?
you.
See what I did there? Yeah.
Well, it's imposter syndrome is a unique brand of insecurity, and it's broad. It is it has a wide reach across different people, across different cultures, across different stages in your career, different ages, different generations. I really do believe no one is immune
Mm-hmm.
to imposter syndrome, but there are those who it affects more and those who it affects less. And I too am curious, Betty, what is contributing to these feelings of inadequacy
Yeah.
and unworthiness, if that's a word. I do have a colleague who I believe is the youngest of 8 or 9 siblings. So I'll connect you with him. I'm sure he would love to chat.
Ooh, that's a lot of brothers and sisters.
Oh, I can't imagine.
I'm struggling. Can you see I have no words? There are no, that's too many kids, Casey. It's too many kids.
You see how I said 8 or 9? Would it make a difference? 8 or 9?
It doesn't. It doesn't. I mean, it really doesn't.
After a certain number.
For me, once you get past 2, I'm like, no frame of reference, no idea what you're
Right.
talking, you know.
They can't outnumber us.
Whew. All right. Well, that kind of was nice. Thank you for sharing that. There's a nice sort of segue into the last question I have for you, which is, why did you want to be part of this imposter syndrome project?
Well, a number of reasons. First of all, I love you, Betty, and I love talking to you, and I love everything you do and all your projects.
Yay.
But really, this touches me. This topic. It's important to me personally, with my own personal experience with imposter syndrome, but also in my career. I have seen so many people come to me and say, "I need help with my resume. I need help interviewing. I want to apply for this job," and you know helping them understand the word overqualified versus underqualified versus what skills do you need to highlight and how they talk about themselves, even just
Mm-hmm.
preparing for an interview. That's really been an experience that was eye-opening for me about imposter syndrome, is the jobs that people think that they're eligible for versus not, and the jobs they go for. I really have noticed a lot of imposter syndrome in the job search
Yeah.
process,
Oh,
especially for
yeah.
students, undergraduate and graduate. And so that is the one of the reasons why this topic is so interesting to me, and I love exploring it with you. So uh, I appreciate being part of this.
I'm so glad that you did say yes and that you would be part of it. And I'm so excited that you've shared your story. I can't wait for others to hear it. So thank you so much, Casey Platt, for sharing your experience with us. And thanks to the listeners. I hope you'll continue with this series and hear more stories about dealing with imposter syndrome. So many amazing people deal with this every day, and sharing their story helps them and you feel less alone. So be sure to follow If You Ask Betty on LinkedIn and YouTube for more episodes and resources. And tell your friends about it. Hit that share button so that they too can know that they are not alone. Peace out.